My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
Hey, hotcakes. Welcome to Hot Take, the podcast where we talk about how to talk about climate change. I'm Amy Westervelt.
And I'm Mariana Heckler. This is the first episode of our season 3, our third season of this.
That's
yeah,
right.
Kind of hard to believe that we made it this far. But this episode, we're going to be looking back at the wild ride that was the year 2020. And we're going to hope that by the time we listen to this episode again in a year, that 2021 hasn't made 2020 look adorable. Hey y'all, so we recorded this episode on Tuesday, January the 6th, before we knew the results of Georgia and before all hell broke loose in Washington. And we're recording this update on Friday, January the, I don't know anymore, I guess 40th.
Who the hell knows? 8th.
January the 8th?
Yeah.
16 years have passed. 17 years have passed since we recorded the first episode. But in all seriousness, Wednesday was quite a day. We went from extremely happy about the Georgia elections and seeing two Democrats get elected, the first Black and the first Jewish senator from Georgia.
That's right.
Going to Washington, to immediately being terrified about the events in Washington, D.C., where a racist fascist mob stormed the Capitol, actually got into the Capitol, into the offices, into the halls of Congress.
They literally took a shit in the Capitol.
Are you serious?
Someone...
Like in the hallway?
Yes. I just like... Yes. Wow. I'm just like, wow, okay, these are the people who self-describe as patriots.
Waving Confederate and Nazi flags in the Capitol. And look, I understand that the United States has always been racist. Believe me, nobody understands that better than this Black woman from Mississippi. But that does not mean that this means nothing. You know, I've had a few people pop up on my social media being like, well, the White House was built by slaves who were being held hostage. Yeah, but honey, there is a difference between... Just because something started bad does not mean you let it continually get worse, or that you excuse when it regresses.
Yeah, I mean, there's been, of course, as usual, sort of a lot of problematic takes on this. Everything from, oh, these are just, you know, poor rural whites who feel misunderstood and left out, and now is not the time for, you know, the left to be criticizing them, blah, 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 to like way overdoing sympathy for the white woman who was shot by police as part of the protest.
So,
and it's been, it's really, it's something.
It is. And, you know, this is why words matter. This is why misinformation matters. This is why propaganda matters. Yes, this has been centuries in the making. Yes, this is the natural result of white supremacy. It's also the natural result of letting lies go unchecked. It is the natural result of pointing and laughing at horribly misinformed and radicalized people. It is the natural result of just like avoiding difficult conversations because you want to get through the holidays easier. So what we're looking at is an extremely dangerous cult. Like these, like I know we all think QAnon is funny. It's not funny.
It's really disturbing, actually.
Exactly.
It's very disturbing.
There were people with zip ties thinking that they were about to like bring pedophiles to justice. Okay, and they really believe that. It doesn't matter how ridiculous you think their beliefs are. They believe it, and that's what matters. So, anyhow.
That's right. Well, and those beliefs have been legitimized by people in power who very cynically want to use, people's sort of willingness to believe these theories or whatever to their own end. So that's the other thing too. It's like I mean, well, I think people should be held responsible for their actions, period. But I also feel like there is a large amount of accountability that needs to happen around these political leaders who very knowingly, weaponized these conspiracy theories to their own ends and very cynically, allowed people to continue to believe lies because it served their interests.
Exactly. And nobody knows better about misinformation and propaganda than perhaps climate people.
That's right. That is right.
This is why, to Amy and I, it's so important to cover the discourse of the climate conversation, because words matter. Words are actions.
Right.
So,
that's right.
Anyhow.
Anyway, back to the show.
This episode's format is a little bit different. We're going to be looking back, and it's just going to be me and Amy for this episode.
That's right. And we're going to look at both how climate coverage changed overall in terms of how much or how little there was of it, and some of kind of the key themes that came out in the year.
Exactly. And last disclaimer is that we're not sober for this episode. I don't know who you thought we were, if we were going to look back on 2020 stone sober. We're not doing dry January over here, folks.
Nope.
No.
Nope. Can you hear the ice in my glass? I don't know if you can anymore.
I can hear it. Yeah, because I've got better headphones this time. But yeah, what are you drinking, Amy?
I have a mix of tequila, a jalapeno simple syrup that I made, some grapefruit juice, and some lemon. So sort of like a citrusy, spicy marg.
Oh, that's kind of like the hot take, but you just don't have the ginger beer. I made a hot take and I added cucumber to it.
Ooh, yum.
Yeah.
That sounds good.
Yeah,
that sounds really
It sounds
good.
really necessary, and I brought the tequila in here with me just in case I need to freshen it up.
If you have to top it up.
Exactly. So with that, you ready?
It's time to talk about climate. We have to start with the climate coverage and how much it plummeted in 2020.
It wasn't good.
At the end, it was not good. Yeah. We ended 2019 thinking, wow, we've come so far.
Right.
Climate is here to stay. This is amazing. January, still looking pretty good. January 2020, climate coverage had almost doubled from January 2019.
Yep.
Same again in February 2020. We're like, yes, this is looking good. And then
March.
Then Corona happened.
March. Yeah. And all the media institutions were like, no one can think about two things at one time. That is literally impossible for the human brain. Only octopuses can do that.
Yep, it's true. Yeah, so climate change coverage in March dropped 36%. In April, it dropped 30%, 30 more percent.
13 more.
Yeah, so there was a 59% drop from January to April in coverage.
Yeah.
And
so March 2020 compared to March 2019 was drastically lower. The thing to remember, going back to that January 2020 number that you had talked about, where climate coverage had doubled from a year before, Australia was on fire. A whole continent was on fire. I think it's important to remember that that's how we started the year.
And that was only last January.
It was only last January. And the other thing to keep in mind is that even though the Australia fires pretty much doubled climate coverage, we weren't talking about the Australia fires nearly enough. Not even close. And there are also these horrible floods happening in Indonesia at the exact same time, and you weren't hearing about them at all. and the locust swarms in Africa, in East Africa.
That's right.
You weren't hearing about them at all. So even though there was a huge jump in climate coverage in January 2020, it wasn't nearly enough. And it was basically a double of the bare minimum.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, on that note, fires in California brought coverage back up a little bit in sort of late summer, early fall, but we never did really catch up to 2019 numbers. And we're still, quite a bit below them now. However, bright side, climate coverage is rising month by month now. And people did find some creative ways to tell the climate story. We definitely saw a huge boom, I think, this year in climate media in general.
Oh, we did.
All the newsletters and the podcasts and just lots of people kind of breaking out on their own and trying new things like we did.
Like we did, yeah.
But yeah. And just to put this conversation to rest, no, we don't think the market is oversaturated.
It's not even close.
There's lots of different angles on climate, and there's plenty of room for more climate media of all kinds.
Yeah, no, we talk about this a lot, you and I, that we're thrilled to see so many new podcasts and newsletters coming up. Hot Take isn't even that old. It's a year and a couple of months old, and our newsletter is less than a year old. And there's so many different.
And we're like the old heads all of a sudden.
All of it, with the podcast, not quite with the newsletter yet. But there's so many different ways to tell this story, and there's no way for it to be too many people talking about it. You would never say that there's too many politics newsletters or too many feminism podcasts, right? And we need just as much media saturation on climate as there is on all of those other issues, because climate is just as big as all of those other issues. And I think there's this thing with people who have been in climate work for a long time, feeling like they need to read and absorb every piece of climate media. And we need to get to a place where that's physically impossible. Where
that's a really good point.
You're not going to be able to read every newsletter. You're not going to be able to read every story. You're not going to be able to listen to every podcast, because all of it is too much. And that's how we know we've hit the perfect pitch, when you can't keep up.
Yep. That's exactly right.
Right. And that was a big part of why we started our newsletter, was that we were starting to get to the point where you couldn't keep up with every single story. And so, we have a digest in our newsletter to keep it, to just keep track of all the climate stories. But there were definitely parts of this year where we were like, why is our digest so short? And it was because there wasn't enough people publishing on it.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. Yeah, but there were still some really standout stories. We put a call out on Twitter this past week for people to send us some of their favorites, and people really delivered. There were a bunch of stories in there that I had not seen when they first came out that were great. So make sure you check that out.
Yeah. The other thing we saw in terms of these broad overstrokes is that a lot of these big media outlets who had made big commitments to climate really kind of dropped the ball, and then renewed them later in the year when the West Coast was on fire. But then it turned out to be that a lot of these magazines, especially, their commitment to covering climate as the story of our time really just meant giving somebody a newsletter. And that's really what it turned into. And it was super disappointing. I felt like I stopped seeing as much climate coverage from the New Yorker in particular, and the Atlantic too. And no shade on Bill McKibben and Rob Meyer, who both have newsletters there and are great writers, but they can't tell that whole story. Just giving one dude a newsletter, it does not a content strategy make.
I know.
And you're the fucking Atlantic. You're the New Yorker. You're going to tell me that you can't cover this? The world's on fire and you can't find the resources to fucking cover it? Girl, holler at me. Commission me. I'll write it. Actually, don't. Actually, don't. I have enough shit to do. But
you don't have time. Yeah. But no, it's really wild. I know. It is. It's really, because, I don't know, especially because a lot of folks made those commitments right after they had pulled their climate reporters off of climate to cover COVID. And it's Yeah. I don't know. I don't understand why. It's crazy. Like not to like toot my own horn here, but
toot it.
like indulge
Toot
me
it,
for
Amy.
a moment. Like maybe like 10 or so years ago, I partnered with a friend of mine to start like a crowd-funded climate reporting collaborative because we were annoyed by the fact that all these large national outlets did not have like in-depth climate coverage. They were not running long-form climate stories. There were hardly ever climate features. There was just like, it was sort of maybe like a news feed on like the biggest climate news, but that was about it. And so, we started that and we syndicated content. It ended up being like 6 of us to The Atlantic and The Guardian and all these places. And we ended up ending it because, in part, like all of these places started to actually like have much better climate reporting and to really establish climate desks and all that stuff. And then I feel like, I don't know, I just am like, how many times are we going to go through this cycle?
Right.
Why can't we just have people in the same way that there's a business desk at every newspaper? Why is there not just always a climate desk and like those reporters, weigh in on a whole wide variety of stories? Like a lot of different things can be a story that a business reporter does, for example. And I don't know why it's like taken us so long to get to that point with climate.
I mean, I think it says a lot about what we value, right? Like you would never write a story about pretty much anything without talking about the economic impacts of it. But we feel like it's perfectly fine to write all of these stories about anything without the climate impacts or climate intersections taking front and center stage. And that says a lot about what we think is permanent and what we think is not.
Yeah.
And that's like a major freaking problem. Like I read all these stories about the refugee crisis, for example. Hardly ever does it mention climate change, but every single time it talks about how much money it takes to feed a refugee family, how much money it takes to build a refugee facility, and like how much, like the economic impact of it is always included in the story, because without that, it would be considered incomplete. Well, how is it complete without talking about the climate implications of, first of all, why folks are moving in the first place? Like, what are the climate implications of taking a boat full of refugees and casting them out to sea indefinitely? Like, what does that mean in a hotter summer, in a hotter sun, on acidic oceans, right? So I don't know. I could talk about this forever.
Yeah. No, I know it's really frustrating. And I do hope, I mean, we are hearing more of these kind of climate commitments. So hopefully, we'll see more coming from them this year.
Yeah.
And I do feel like, I mean, there are some pretty heavy hitters that have left the kind of, quote unquote mainstream and started their own things too.
They have.
So
yeah.
I think that's actually, that's not a bad thing. I think that helps to like spur the bigger outlets to realize like, oh, actually there's an audience for this stuff.
Exactly.
So yeah.
Yeah. And we'll be keeping an eye on this.
Yes.
This is what we do here. So if they're keeping their commitments, we will be happy to congratulate. And if not, we will be happy to drag. I want to talk about the first big thing that we've already talked about that kicked climate out of the headlines, and that was the COVID-19 pandemic. I was just re-listening to our episode after like the COVID-19 lockdowns became real in early March. I think we had David Wallace Wells on.
We did. That's right.
And we were supposed to have recorded that one in person and weren't able to because obviously, and it still felt so bizarre. Like just listening to that podcast, all we were talking about was like washing your hands. And like, nothing about masks.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
We were like talking about like, oh, this can't last that long. Like this will be crazy if it's still going on by summer. It would be so crazy if it's still going on by May. Like we sounded so young.
Oh, God.
We just couldn't.
Wow.
It was so surreal at that point to like believe that this was real. And you know what's so fucked up is like I look back at that sometimes fondly. Like I look back at
early quarantine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I have fond memories. I have nostalgia.
Yes.
early
It's
quarantine.
weird. Like, remember, I just remember like how fucking weird I thought it was when I, like, the first few times I went to the grocery store and like everyone was wearing a mask and like how unsettling that was. And now it feels like it's going to be unsettling when it's not that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the things that like I still have the nostalgia for too is like during that time we still had the primaries going on.
Yeah.
And like it didn't feel like Joe Biden was inevitable.
Yes.
And look.
Yes, that's right. In fact, it seemed like that really kind of came out of nowhere. I was just remembering that about Biden, that no one expected him to do anything.
He was a laughing
and then all
stock.
of a sudden it was like, yeah, right?
He was a straight up laughing stock, and then he was inevitable, and it was like, how did that happen? But yeah, in early quarantine, he was still going up against Bernie. And I don't know, maybe that was like what made those early days not feel as bad to me. And look, I'm very glad that Joe Biden won. Like I cried tears of relief. But you know, I wanted Bernie instead, or I wanted Elizabeth Warren instead, or Julian Castro instead.
At least one of those. Yeah,
He wasn't my top.
Yeah.
He wasn't my top choice.
I don't think he was very many people's top choice.
Yeah. But
you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Going back to COVID-19, so when this really took off in mid-March, a lot of climate stories got postponed and then killed altogether, and it became pretty much impossible to pitch them unless there was a hook between climate and COVID, because we talked about this a little bit earlier this week. Like in the early days of COVID, the other thing that was kind of happening was like if you were a climate person, people who didn't know anything about climate or COVID would rush to you and be like, so what is this? I don't know. Like, can you explain this to me? And blah, blah, blah. And all the climate people were like, I don't know either.
I don't know.
I'm not a public health person. Like, what do you think?
Yeah.
And what that says to me is that climate is way too tethered to science. So people think that if you care about climate, you must be like a science geek. No shade on science geeks. I have lots of scientist friends. They're great people. Lots of them are very funny. But like not everyone who's into climate is into science. And that is like a perception that we need to shift. But I remember that and being like, I don't know. They said, wash your hands. So wash your hands. I don't know what to tell you. I can't even calculate time zones. You think I can figure out a virus?
Yeah.
The other bonkers way that people tried to make COVID a climate story was this eco-fascist myth making that drove all of us crazy that the earth is healing, Amy.
Yeah.
And we are the virus. Like all of these pictures and memes of like
the animals are returning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There were like whales in New Orleans, and it was like, oh, this is where like whales are not supposed to be in New Orleans.
Do you remember the fake pictures of dolphins in Venice?
That's what I was alluding to. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. And then everyone was like, it's fake. And then it was like, oh, well, but still, the earth is healing. And like, ugh, I don't know. I was talking to someone about this the other day because they were like, but I don't understand how that ties into eco-fascism. So like real quick, basically, you know, if humans are the virus, then what that quickly leads to is like, which humans are the virus, right?
Exactly.
And like, yeah. And also like, you know, if nature can only be healed by people dying, then like, which people should be the ones that die or that like have fewer kids or, you know, any of those things. It just kind of leads to this whole, you know, we need to protect our natural resources from humans versus like, humans need to learn how to live in balance with nature,
Right.
which is like a little less fashy.
Right.
Yeah.
And also, like, think about the people who were suffering the worst from this pandemic, and it was Black and Indigenous people.
Exactly.
And those are the people
Yep.
who have contributed the least to climate change. So again, with this
Yep.
whole who's the virus thing here, right? Like, honestly, if we want to be
Exactly.
real about it, rich people are the virus.
Yes. Yes. And you know what? COVID didn't slow them down at all.
No, no, it sped them up running to New Zealand. And actually, that's another way
Yes.
that this was actually a climate story that didn't get a lot of attention. So when COVID really kicked off, a lot of rich people headed to their bunkers in New Zealand and other places too, but mostly New Zealand. And it was like, I think a lot of people outside of climate didn't quite realize that the super rich have these bunkers. And they've had them because they've been like, well, when climate gets really bad, I'll just go to New Zealand to my bunker that was like
Right.
stocked with everything they needed. And they're actually quite nice
Yeah.
and ride it out. Right. And
Yeah.
they were like, well, good thing I invested in that because now there's a pandemic and I can just ride it out in my bunker. And
Yep.
so, yeah. And also New Zealand now, like people are having parties, like they're doing good. So
They're doing great. I know.
Yeah.
I know. Yeah.
yeah. So that eco-fascist myth-making was pretty quickly followed with the, oh, you think COVID is bad? Wait till you get a load of climate change. Like that little false dichotomy. Like this drove me crazy. I saw so many political cartoons where it was like, look, coronavirus is this big thing beating up this guy. And then right behind him is an even bigger, even angrier guy labeled climate change, ready to like beat the guy up again. And then behind him
It's
is the
such a
biodiversity
problem.
crisis. There's an even bigger, even
Right.
angrier guy. And it was just like,
Right.
dude, like they're not going to take turns, first of all.
Right. Right. Exactly. Exactly. Yep. They're going to come all at once. And, that also, I just feel like in the same way that people were doing the whole like nature is healing thing, a lot of people were really framing like this sort of self-imposed, quarantine stuff and whatever as like, as kind of like the same as a climate solution. I was like, okay, yeah, like it's not either or problem. They're not totally similar problems and the solutions are not similar. Like why can't we just talk about these things as like, side by side complex issues? Why do we have to, do this thing where we're like comparing and contrasting all of them all the time? I don't know.
Yeah, it was interesting too because Republicans kind of latched on to it as like this is what the Green New Deal would do. Like it would deprive you
That's right.
of this.
Oh,
this,
do you
and
hate
this.
quarantine? Just wait till you see the Green New Deal.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly.
Totally. Yep. Yeah. When actually the reality is more like, if you hate quarantine, just wait till you get a hold of like not acting on climate,
Right. Honestly, the real thing should be, oh, if you hated wildfires in 2020, wait till you see them in 2025.
Oh God.
Yeah, I know. Too soon. Too soon. It's never not going to be too soon for that. For anyone in California.
It's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I know. Okay, so, eventually there was quite a bit of very good climate writing on climate and COVID and like in particular kind of debunking all of these myths that you just talked about.
Yeah. So
yeah, what were some of your favorites?
my favorites about this myth in particular of We Are the Virus came from Kate Marvel and Brian Kahn. Kate wrote a piece called I Am a Mad Scientist that you published on Drilled.
It was so good.
Yeah, which was fantastic. And Brian wrote 2 articles on Earther about basically how craven the Republicans are and how like they actually want you to become accustomed to mass death. And then later on, he had a follow-up essay that was like, oh, they want you to become comfortable with mass death of people of color in particular. Like, they're becoming like nakedly Eco-fascists. Like when they accept, like as Republicans accept climate change, they are becoming more and more eco-fascist, and is super fucking gross. Another one, David Wallace Wells wrote about how Corona teaches us what happens when you ignore a problem.
Yes. That one was very good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how you don't want to get alarmed. You don't want to get alarmed. Because there was also another big parallel between climate change and COVID is like not wanting to be hysterical, which I think speaks to misogyny. Really, like nobody wants to overreact, right? And then it turns out everybody's fucking
God
underreacting.
Yes,
and that comes into play with both climate change and our reaction to Corona. And so David was writing about like you could have been in way better shape. Like this was gonna suck either way, but this aversion to overreacting is a big part of why you have a huge problem. And then you wrote a fantastic piece in Huffington Post about individual actions.
Yes, because again, people were like, oh, see, if we each, chose to do without, we could tackle climate change. And it was like, no, okay, first of all, we're not all, and none of us are choosing this.
No, it's not a choice.
Just like, yeah, it's not a choice. And also, like, actually look at what has happened with everybody choosing their own personalized COVID guidelines. It has not gone well.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's not working.
Right.
It's not really
and also,
working.
people have been enabled to make those choices by government policies, right? Like, it wasn't like if my company had not said you can work from home, I wouldn't have been able to work from home. You know, like
exactly. Yeah.
Things had to enable that.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And then you wrote, speaking of which, a great piece about Corona and climate change making us feel a lot of the same things, which I thought was so smart because it's true. It was like, oh my God, yeah. It's like this kind of like paralysis of like grief and anxiety.
Yeah.
It feels very similar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I gotta tell you, looking back at that piece from March, like I can't help but laugh at myself.
Oh, you naive little former Mary.
I was so dramatic. Like the opening line is, I've been crying a lot lately. And I'm like, girl, you don't know what the fuck the rest of this year is going to be like.
Get ready, Mary.
Like, oh, really? You will be crying from laughing delirious maniacal tears by the end of this year. You're going to be in a corner.
Yeah. Yeah, seriously. March feels like a really long time ago.
It's like ages ago. So, no, I mean, I'm glad I wrote it, but I also look back at it like, oh, God, girl, you are adorable. Pull yourself together. But it was very real at the time. At the time, it was super real. So, Amy, you know what my bright spot was on Wednesday? Green trolling has become bipartisan. I don't know if you saw this, but Chevron decided that they were going to wade into the fray and be the voice of reason. And yeah.
I know. It was amazing. It was totally amazing.
So they tweeted calling for a peaceful transition of the U.S. government. The violence in D.C. tarnishes a 2-century tradition of respect for the rule of law. We look forward to engaging with President-elect Biden and his administration to move the nation forward. So on the left, people immediately got in their shit. But then the right was not far behind.
I know. I loved it. Like the left people were like, oh, really? Because we're looking forward to working with Biden to like put you out of business. And I thought your reply was the best because it was like a link to a story that just says fossil fuel industries pumped millions into Trump's inauguration. And Mary tweeted that story at them with a this you.
Yeah.
It was really good, but then, like, yeah, all the MAGA people got in on it, where they were like, "Fuck you, Chevron! Like, I'm never gonna buy your gas again. I'm switching brands." As though anyone has brand loyalty to gas anyway, but still, it was hilarious.
So yeah, Yeah, the other very big thing that knocked climate out of the headlines this year was, it feels weird to say it, but it was racism.
Racism.
Yeah, and
imagine that. Yeah.
You know, the reason it feels weird to say that is because when do we ever not have racism around these parts?
Exactly. I know.
But this summer, there was a huge and overdue eruption around Black Lives Matter in the immediate wake of George Floyd's murder. And it was about much more than the murder of George Floyd in Minnesota. It was about Breonna Taylor. It was about Ahmaud Arbery. It was about plenty of other people going back to slave ships, right? But that seemed to be like a very galvanizing moment. And I just want to say, like, I knew that moment was very different because in the wake of every other police murder that's in my recent memory, people started to attack the place where it happened. Like when Eric Garner was killed, it became all about like fuck Staten Island. And when Trayvon Martin was killed, it was fuck Florida. And like even when Philando Castile was killed, it was like fuck Minnesota. But this time nobody like named a locality.
It was fuck the police, rightly so.
It was fuck America, really.
And fuck America.
Right. And it was everywhere. It was seriously everywhere. Nobody localized it at all. And I was like, oh, this is different. And the other thing is that same week, there was a Black man in Central Park named Christian Cooper who, a white lady named Amy.
I know. Yeah. The bad Amy.
Bad Amy. Yeah. Threatened to call the police on him, which is basically threatening his life. And that happened like within days of each other. And it's hard to believe that was the same freaking week.
Yeah. I didn't even remember that those two things were side by side like that. That's nuts.
No,
it did feel, it felt like, well, just seeing, it was, especially because it was, you know, a couple months into quarantine and everything, like it felt like a kind of a heartening moment to see so many people get out and protest and keep protesting for a long time. Right. You know, like it wasn't one day or even 1 week. So so that was super encouraging. And I also felt like the reason so many people poured out into the streets in that way was because, one, we had been deprived of social interaction for so long. That's true.
And also because it was really fucking hot this summer. Every big moment of huge like social unrest has been when it was really, really hot. Like Bastille Day, the LA riots from the 90s, because there have been many LA riots, the Watts riots, rather, the Detroit riots, Newark riots. Every single time that there's been a huge social upheaval, it has been when it was really fucking hot. And so climate change. So the other thing that was crazy about these protests was how brazenly and indiscriminately violent the police were toward the protesters, the medics, the press, just anybody out on the street. They were like absurdly, like astonishingly violent, knowing they were being taped. So like this summer was unlike, you know, unprecedented is a word that's been overused, but that's because all the presidents are in the garbage now. There's no more presidents.
Yeah. It's true. Yeah. So it didn't take long for oil and gas companies to like trot out some of their bullshit woke washing Black Lives Matter squares. Yeah. And,
well, actually not many of them did, but Chevron did, and that pissed people off.
Yes, of all companies, you know, Chevron has been embroiled in this case with Ecuador over basically oil colonialism for the last like 30, 40 years. And on top of that, they fund the fucking police directly in Richmond, where their headquarters is.
And Amy is on top of both of those stories. If you want to hear more about the Ecuador story, listen to Drilled Season 5, which you can listen to all the episodes now. And in our newsletter, you broke the story. Well, not necessarily broke it, because it's like, I think I don't know. Did people know this before?
I don't think people knew because it was, well, the thing that I found was that like there was an agreement. Like, so I had heard for a long time that Chevron funds the police in Richmond. So as soon as they put up that square, I was like, wait a minute, don't they fund the police? That's weird. So I started looking into it, and I found all these old interviews with the chief of police there who was saying, like, if it weren't for Chevron, we'd have like 25% fewer policemen in Richmond. And I was like, what? And then I looked into it more, and I realized that basically when Chevron wanted to expand its refinery in Richmond, they cut a deal with the city of Richmond that included close to like $10 million for specifically police funding. Yeah, which I don't think that had actually been reported because it was kind of buried in a weird, city planning report somewhere. But then I also found out that that they also are like a major donor to a big civil rights group. Yeah. That like was the same, I don't know, that has been a little bit like shady on a few different environmental issues. So Chevron is definitely not, a good neighbor to
No, they're not.
to Black people in Richmond.
No, they really fucking suck. Yeah. And so then that sparked another investigation that revealed that like oil companies have their tentacles all up in the police forces, right? Like, of course they do. And a lot of these places, like New Orleans, like Richmond, like other places, they're like company towns. The oil industry owns everything. Like they fund the museum, they fund the roads. Of course they fund the police. And they need the police, especially as they have pushed forward these laws that make it more and more illegal to protest their infrastructure. Right. So they have a vested interest in propping up the police. And that has a lot to do with the way that the protests this summer were policed.
Yes, very much. I mean, I think I cannot talk about this enough, that there are now more than 20 states have passed laws to either criminalize or increase the criminal penalties for protesting around quote unquote critical infrastructure, which oil companies have worked really hard to expand the definition of to include basically anything. So like it's crazy to me that Republicans who are supposedly big free speech warriors are not up in arms about this, because it's really bad. And they have been pushing for a national law for a while too that has not so far been effective. And we know for a fact from like leaked tapes and documents and all that kind of stuff that was 100% kicked off by the Standing Rock protest.
Yes.
This is the industry's reaction to Standing Rock. Within a few months, they had drafted legislation around this criminalization of protest stuff, and they have now, in the last 3-4 years, passed that legislation in like more than 20 states. Yeah. It's very concerning.
And I believe if you want to know like more about the Standing Rock relationship to this sort of stuff, you should be reading Unicorn Riot. You should be reading Unicorn Riot in general.
They're great.
They're
great.
A really fearless media collective, but I think they did a lot of the reporting around this, right?
They did, and around like every pipeline protest in general. Those guys are so good at just like being on the ground and staying there and talking to all of like the real kind of like local organizers. And they're great.
Their coverage of Standing Rock really informed their coverage of the George Floyd protests this summer. So that's another, and they talk about that too on their site, like their ability to like be on the ground that way. So like that's yet another connection between climate and, race. I mean, climate is inextricable from racism, but from like climate and police brutality that we saw this summer.
That's right.
So
that's right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I mean, I feel like you did such a great job of breaking down that like those two things are not distinct.
Oh my God,
HuffPost essay.
No,
because people did. They started to say like climate people who thought that they were being like good progressives started to say that climate needed to take a backseat to the fight for racial justice, which is a totally false dichotomy and.
it drove me crazy. It was like, who did you
I
think?
love this line that. Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah. Well, yeah. I love this line where you talked about how climate change is not the great equalizer; it's the great multiplier.
Yeah, it is.
And like, yeah. And I thought you made a really good point in that essay too about how it's sort of patronizing and insulting to act like, anyone, and especially Black people, can't think about climate and race at the same time.
They definitely do. And I will say that at the protest that I went to this summer, people were very concerned about climate and very concerned about, like, for the lack of a better term, Mother Earth. Right? Like, they were like, make sure that you don't throw your mask on the ground. Like, we have to take care of our planet. This is our home, blah, blah, blah. Like, people were, they don't see these things as separate things. Like, Black people don't think that way. Also, while we're giving out shout outs, I want to give out one to Drew Costley for his piece on Medium about, like, police bringing more and more pollution into communities of color in terms of their cars, and in terms of their, like, noise pollution. So that really just, like, I hadn't thought of it that way, and it really challenged my thinking. Also, Drew was one of my favorite guests on the show. So.
I was just gonna say that Drew was one of our favorite 2020 guests. He's great. I have to say, like, he's one of those writers where I like everything he writes.
Yes.
I always am like, oh, that's such an interesting take. So yeah, he's great. Yeah. He is great.
And we talk about this, like, almost every time you give me an opportunity. But it was a big theme for me in 2020 is this collision between white nationalism and the climate crisis. And in particular, the Boogaloo Boys, like those sorts of militias, seeing the climate crisis as their opportunity to enact some of their more extreme ideals, right? Like, these are people who have for generations, and I'm not exaggerating, for generations wanted a second civil war and been gearing up for it and building the arsenal for it and looking for any sort of moment of chaos, which what is climate change if not chaos, to bring that to life. And that shit scared the shit out of us. And in particular, we saw it take off this summer with, like, yes, they co-opted and sort of infiltrated a lot of protests. Like, I've heard that from many people who were on the very front lines of organizing those protests. And they also took advantage of the wildfires on the West Coast and set up these, like, roadblocks that you had to go through. Like, what are you going to do? Call the cops? Like, there's a roadblock and everything's on fire. No, you're going to comply with the fucking roadblock. And these people have guns. Right. Like, what are you going to do? And they specifically harass Black and brown people trying to get through those roadblocks. And
that's right.
What do we do? What do we do when that becomes the norm?
Right. When they self-appoint. I mean, you saw that with the Kenosha shooting, too. You saw it in response to some of the hurricanes, too. This idea of, like, not only does chaos give them an opportunity to do whatever, it also, when it's a natural disaster or civil unrest or things like that, a lot of these guys sort of self-appoint as, like, peacekeepers, right? Or as, like, militia. Like, they see themselves as they immediately grab authority when there's a vacuum of authority, right? So, like, that is very, very scary.
It is.
As things get more and more chaotic.
Exactly.
It's not good.
So, yeah. Well, we'll talk more about that. This is just something we're going to have to be comfortable talking about.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso and Samra Origins by The Weekend Coffee Collection.
Introducing Samra Origins. My collaboration with Nespresso is a connection to my roots, to my mother, Samra. Coffee that hits the right notes. It transports you. Crafted with unique notes and bold soaring flavors. Experience a taste that moves you. Nespresso and Samra Origins.
Discover more at Nespresso.com.
I do want to talk about both the crazy amounts of fire and hurricanes this past year. And we saw in California, I mean, it was like record setting seems like a tame way to put it because it was double the previous record of acres burned.
Yeah. How about record burning?
Yeah.
How about record burning?
Yes. It was just unbelievable, the amount of time that it went on and the number of sort of new things that we saw, including our first gigafire.
Yeah.
Which means that it burned at least 1 million acres of land. That's insane.
That is
just insane.
That's a lot of acres.
It's nuts.
That's a lot of acres.
It really was like the entire state was on fire at a certain point. And then that just lasted for ages and ages. I would say the only good thing that came out of this fire season is that the media covered the shit out of it. I mean, it was
on the West
Coast. On the West Coast in particular, but even the national media like really got their shit together, especially by, like a month into it. You were seeing multiple cover stories on fire. You were seeing coverage of like how the wildfires were intersecting with protests and with COVID and with prisons and with like the prison firefighting system and all kinds of stuff that like we just like really had not seen before this season. Yeah. And then there was this moment where like people were saying on Twitter that like, oh, the national media should be covering the West Coast fires every day. And of course, the Los Angeles Times was like, hello, we are also a national media outlet.
Yeah, but it was true that the New York Times and the Washington Post and the cable news stations were extremely slow to covering the wildfires.
Were slow.
It was very weird that like half the goddamn country, like the state with like the 5th biggest economy in the world, is on fire, and y'all aren't talking about it. Like, what? How is this? Yeah. How is this reality?
Yeah.
Yes. And so
yes, and like despite a fair amount of media coverage, there still was like rampant disinformation happening around what was supposed to happen with evacuation, how these fires had started. In Oregon in particular, there was like this crazy rumor that Antifa had started the fires, which kicked off this whole, self-appointed militia-run checkpoint problem that you were talking about before.
Yeah.
And then there was also a rumor that Sierra Club had started the fires, which I actually think was people getting confused about the idea of forest management and fire, and blaming Sierra Club for a relaxation of fire management policies, aka logging, being anti-logging, and somehow that became like Sierra Club or arsonist.
Yeah.
And it was wild. It was totally wild. And then, of course, like, not like around the same time, there were these horrendous record-setting hurricanes that we just weren't seeing coverage of.
Wait.
I feel like it was...
Yeah, but I want to go back to the fires real quick before we get into the hurricanes. Yeah. Like, I feel like, first of all, I had a big problem with the way that we talked about prison firefighters. One was that we talked about prison firefighters only in terms of their ability to fight the fire, right? Like, it was like, oh my God, isn't this crazy? Because like the prison firefighters can't fight the fires because there's so much COVID in the prisons, and all the people who were going to fight the fire now have COVID. It was like, wait a minute, but you're not worried about the well-being of the prisoners in the fires. Like, no one's talking about evacuating the prisons in the fire. Like, the story that I was more concerned about was what happens when you have to evacuate a prison? Who decides when you evacuate a prison? Like, prisoners can't decide. And the people who make that decision don't value their lives. We know that from a million pieces of evidence. So I remember, and also, and this was hardly covered. I had to like really search for people talking about, like, are they going to evacuate the prisons or not? And I never saw anything about a California prison being evacuated. I did see something about an Oregon prison being evacuated, and they were evacuated to another already overcrowded prison that was already overrun with COVID. So, like, what happens to these folks in a fire?
No, it was crazy. It was like, the idea, you wrote about this in the newsletter, and I don't remember the exact line, but you referenced this idea of people who cannot choose when to evacuate themselves.
Right.
And it was such a gut punch, because it's like, it's not up to you whether you, like, when you get to evacuate or whether you get to evacuate.
Exactly.
It's just.
And if they don't evacuate you in time, because fires move fast, you just burn.
That's right. They do.
You just burn.
That's right. Yeah. I just think about it in terms of like all those pictures that we always see, right, during fire season of like people running from their cars, or like, cars being left on the freeway and whatever. And it's like, well, yeah, like that could happen near a prison. The thing about California fire season is it's like usually made exponentially worse by crazy wind. And wind also makes fires do like very unpredictable things very quickly. Yeah, exactly. So, it's gross.
Yeah.
And then I do think, though, that the one good thing about coverage of the prison firefighters this year was that, like, so, I mean, this is a thing I've seen for at least the last 10 or so years, ever since, like, the national media discovered that California uses prison firefighters, which, by the way, all 5 of like the major fire Western states do this. And we definitely should be putting some attention on all the other states that do it too.
Yeah.
But California, the big problem, well, there are many big problems with the prison firefighting system, but one of the many is that people can't go get a job as a firefighter when they leave prison.
Yeah.
And that was one very successful push this year, was that there was enough critical coverage that by the end of fire season, Governor Newsom announced a change in the law that at least people who do get trained as firefighters while they're incarcerated can have that on their resume and like get hired as a firefighter when they leave prison. It's a very small but meaningful, like, shift.
Yeah.
So good job, media, on that one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that is the power of the media, right? Like, that is the power of having these conversations. And how much do we lose when we refuse to have them because there's some other crisis going on?
Yeah. Speaking of other crises.
Yeah, hurricanes. There are a lot of them.
We didn't see any of this kind of coverage of the hurricanes. I actually was like really shocked. And I'm not even, I'm not from a state that has hurricanes. I've been in one hurricane. Yeah. And
Which one were you
even
in?
from over here I was in Hurricane Iniki in Hawaii.
Okay.
But yeah, it's like like way over here in Fireland, I was like, why am I not seeing more about these hurricanes?
Right. I remember you saying something about like, what if like the East Coast was on fire? And I think there's a couple of things about that this year. So like, first of all, just to like set the record, this was the busiest hurricane season on record, right? And like, we went deep into the Greek alphabet. And Louisiana was hit with the strongest storm since 1856, Hurricane Laura. And New Orleans was hit with the strongest storm ever to hit it dead on, which was Hurricane Zeta. I think a lot of people don't quite realize that Hurricane Katrina did not hit New Orleans dead on. So this is an even bigger impact, actually, to the city. I have a lot of theories on why we didn't talk about this. One is that these hurricanes were mostly in the Gulf Coast, and mostly the United States we have considered the Gulf Coast a sacrifice zone. Like, I remember very vividly after Katrina, people being like, well, is it worth it to build back there? Or are they silly? Or do they deserve what they get? Or blah, blah, blah. Like, it's kind of like the way people talk about people who live in Tornado Alley. Like, well, it's called Tornado Alley and you moved there anyway, right? And so, and a lot of these hurricanes didn't go up the Atlantic coast, right? Like it wasn't like Sandy. It wasn't like, you know, even the storms that kind of threatened cities like New York. So there was that. And also the media industry in the South has been like super decimated. So I think we talked about this in a previous episode, how like there are news deserts all over the country, and in particular in the South, and in particular in Black communities. At the time of Hurricane Katrina, the New Orleans Times-Picayune was, you know, it's never been not struggling, I don't think. But it was still a strong paper with a strong newsroom that, like, I think they won the Nobel Prize for journalism that year because, but I think, like, they were looking at layoffs ahead of that, but then that, like, that saved them. But now it's been through, like, major layoffs and switch over ownership over and over again. And so I think that has a lot to do.
Yeah, you're right. It's been totally decimated, which you made this point when we talked to Drew Costley. Reporters so important for their own local papers, but they're also the conduit to national news.
Actually, folks should go back and listen to that episode about local journal. Like, we talked to Drew about local journalism and this impacts for climate, and it has a lot to do with this. And so another thing that I looked at around the hurricanes in Louisiana was like, so I tried to find prisons that had been evacuated, and I didn't actually find them. What I found was refugee camps that had not been evacuated, because there are like these ICE detention centers. I shouldn't call them refugee camps. ICE detention centers. This is basically like jails for refugees, and people who like lost power during Hurricane Laura, waiting on. And these are people who, first of all, no human being deserves to be treated this way. I don't care what they did. No human being deserves to go through this. But these are folks who were coming to America because they thought they were coming to a better life. And they wound up in these facilities where the toilet doesn't flush, and they're like living with human waste, and like there's no power because the hurricane knocked it out, and they have no food, and they have no water, and they have no freedom of movement because they are in this ICE facility waiting on some sort of trial. And there were people from all over the world, from like the Congo, from the Middle East, from Latin America, obviously, and like all of them. I wondered how many of them, when I was reading this article, were actually climate refugees.
Yeah, totally. Of course they were, because they've like migrated because of some kind of catastrophe, right? And then they wind up trapped in the shitty U.S. immigration system.
Right. And
facing a hurricane.
Yeah. And speaking of that, I think it's Honduras was the hardest hit. With two giant hurricanes in a row, where people from like, development programs who are used to going to disaster zones being like, I've never seen anything like this. I have never seen devastation like this. Yeah, this is the headline. Even disaster veterans are stunned by what's happened in Honduras.
Yeah, because they were within a couple days of each other, and they were both Category 5s, right?
4.
I mean, just unbelievable.
Category 4. It was Eta and Iota.
Oh, jeez.
And so first of all, one, it's important to think about these storms outside of the United States, and also it's important to consider the Gulf Coast part of this country too. And also it's important to think about cyclones and typhoons with the same level of empathy, right? And like, I remember writing at the start of the summer about like our apathy toward Cyclone Amphan victims. Cyclone Amphan was this really fearsome storm to strike in India and Bangladesh, and people in America could give a fuck. And the answer to that is not to also not give a fuck about people in America.
Right.
The answer is to give more fucks, not fewer. And it seems like we went toward giving less of a fuck. And it's like, wait, no, we're doing it wrong. We're doing it wrong.
Yeah, totally. It is. It's so disturbing. And I think, I do think that there is this real danger of, between the pandemic and these sort of cascading crises happening, faster. Like everything is just happening faster. Things are happening at the same time. There are these like layers of things happening all at once. I do think there's a real danger of people becoming sort of numb to a real devastation in a way that is just kind of sad and scary.
Yeah. Heather McTeer-Toney wrote about that in Dame magazine, like the price of normalizing climate disasters and climate apathy and how dangerous that can be. And yeah, it's something to police within yourself, because human beings do become, like, empathy is a resource, right? And you can't give it to everyone. So you have to actively, like, even though you think you could never become that person who doesn't care, you do have to actively flex that muscle to make sure that you always remain the person that cares. And it's work.
That's right.
Yeah. All right, so some of the MAGA green trolls of the Chevron tweet are, Chevron needs Joe because Chevron needs China.
Wow. Okay.
So Chevron is getting looped into the QAnon theories.
Wow.
Yeah. Here's another. I look forward to never stopping at another Chevron again.
Wow.
I think a lot of these folks just think that Chevron is a gas station, which is hysterical to me. Here's another one. I like to smoke cigarettes while filling up my tank at your gas station.
Dark.
Here's another one. Thanks, gas station.
Speaking of empathy, let's talk about some guys that lack it, shall we?
Let's do it. Let's do it. I've had enough tequila, Amy.
Oh, Lord. Yeah. So we, in an episode with Kate Aronoff in 2020, talked about all the various forms of sad boys and mad boys in climate.
We also had glad boys. We had so many boys.
We had so many boys, yeah. And then we made a little chart for people in the newsletter of all the climate boys. But this really did seem to be a year that, like, you know, the doomers kind of like really got on steroids, and the what I've been calling the debate me bros, these sort of like very tech focused guys.
You have an amazing essay by that name, by the way, in our newsletter.
Yes.
That, yeah, we got to make sure to link to that.
Yes. They kind of joined forces, and then there were all these guys that Emily Atkin calls the first-time climate dudes, where like they've just discovered that climate is a thing that they should be paying attention to, and they're here to tell us all what the real problem is, which often it is, as Michael Moore said, population.
Yep. They're like, it's just, you know what? I've solved it. I've run the numbers, and it turns out it's just too many motherfuckers. Too many motherfuckers.
Yeah, there's too many people. Too many people. Yeah. So, and they all, I'm apologies to our white male listeners. These are all white guys, and
I mean, no apologies. Go get your people.
No apologies.
Like, go get your boy.
Yeah, round them up. Get them. I mean, there's this real, I do really think that there's this huge kind of reaction happening amongst white men, because climate change really is kind of the first sort of out of control systemic change that's just coming at them.
Yeah.
No one asked them about it, and it doesn't give a shit about their lives. That is not something that you're used to as a straight white guy in this country.
I think, I think the year kind of started with the publication of all of these books from folks that I actually would call the Glad Boys. Like, these are people who frame themselves as reformed climate activists, right? Like, these are the folks who are like, yeah, climate change is real, but like, it's not that bad.
You don't have to worry about it. It's fine.
Yeah. Like, we're going to adapt. It's going to be fine. And what they mean is that I'm going to be fine.
Right. Correct.
Me, Mariana East Hegler, with my black ass, is not going to be fine.
Not so fine.
I'm not gonna be fine.
No. Nope. You will not be flying around in a Jetsons mobile with these guys.
Unless...
Or kicking it on Mars.
I finally make friends with Beyonce, because I do believe that she and I are best friends who are separated at birth. I think that we would be such good friends if we actually met in real life.
It's going to be you and Beyonce in a bunker in New Zealand.
And Solange. Yeah, and the kids. Like, yeah, I'll be the nanny. So
there was Michael Schellenberger's book, Apocalypse Never. Later in the year, there was Bjorn Lomborg's book. I don't even remember what it was called. Bjorn Lomborg has been around for a while. He's a big pal of Michael Schellenberger's, and they both promote this idea that, actually the real problem is climate panic.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sure.
Cool.
And then there was Michael Moore's movie Planet of the Humans, which made one very valid point, which was that, we need to address some of the kind of the resource and capitalism problems with the renewable energy and electric vehicle industries that, we've talked about this before too. Like, the last thing you want to do is have like just a different problem of the same magnitude, because now we're like running everything on batteries or, whatever, that like you have to address sort of these bigger power structure issues underneath. Unfortunately, that point was undermined by using a lot of very old tape, first of all.
For one thing.
And then ultimately coming to the conclusion that, the real problem is just that there's too many people, which, has had a long history of leading very quickly to eugenicist arguments about who should be having kids and how many and why and all of those kinds of things. So that was a problem. And then we had the deep adaptation guys. So this was a manifesto, always with the manifestos.
I would like to say that, like, I have also written a manifesto.
Yes. Good.
And I'm very proud of myself, because it's always white guys writing a manifesto. So, like,
it always is. It always is. Yes. So the Deep Adaptation Manifesto actually just got a big write-up in the New York Times. The manifesto itself came out earlier this year. There's quite a good, like, detailed rundown of it in Medium that we'll link to as well. And then this New York Times story. The gist of the deep adaptation theory is basically that, it's too late to really do anything about climate change. Adaptation is our only avenue, and
so we gotta adapt.
There's a whole which yes, we do have to adapt, but like there's a whole kind of like there's a whole doomer dude lens on it that's quite
so
I don't know,
here's what
disturbing. It just kind of blocks action right out the gate. It's sort of like,
well, I think adaptation is an action, right? Like, I don't think that that's not a climate action. So here's what I don't understand about climate adaptation versus mitigation. The thing about climate change is that it's a living thing, right? Like, we're talking about a radical change to the climate that we adapted to as human beings, right? So if left unchecked, that change will continue to deepen. It will continue to radicalize. So you can't, it's not like you're adapting to something that's stagnant. You're adapting to a goalpost that's constantly moving. So you can't adapt without mitigating, right? Like we have to come.
That's right.
Like there's no baseline.
Yes.
You can't adapt to
That's
something
right.
that is unpredictable.
That's right. Well, and like any adaptation that you make will be that much more effective if you've also, reduced your consumption of resources and your emissions, right?
Exactly.
So like this is like a thing that's been, I feel like for 20 years or more, there's been this sort of false dichotomy between mitigation and adaptation. You need both, like you need both. And to Michael Moore's point, you also need both, sort of societal and structural change and technology and new ideas,
Yeah. For Michael,
these things are not mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Also, Michael Moore has 0 people of color, like with any sort of,
That's right.
heft in his movie. Right. And so I remember after that movie getting into a fight with a lot of people being like, actually, population control is really fucking problematic. And then being like, well, I support population control in the form of birth control and access to it. And I was like, that is called reproductive freedom. That is not birth control. And words fucking matter, especially when you're talking about populations of color. Like, don't holler at me about population control because it brings back a lot of really problematic memories.
Well, and there is actually like a bad history of, American nonprofits saying that they're working on reproductive freedom in a lot of like African and Latin American countries when like really what they are doing is population control. So like it's just very... It's a touchy subject, and you should probably talk to some people who aren't white guys about it.
You know what I mean? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, that was hard.
It was bad.
Yeah.
This was also the year that Elon Musk just went like full eco-fascist maniac. Yeah, I've been telling people he's a jerk for years, and I feel like people really finally like got on board the fuck Elon Musk train.
Yeah. So where should we start with Elon? Should we start with the COVID, or should we start with him naming his baby like
a symbol?
No, I think he named the baby Gigafire.
Did he?
No, I'm fucking with you.
That would be very funny. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, Elon, I don't know. First, he had this whole thing about, like, he was a COVID truther.
Yeah.
And then he was like, if you're going to arrest anyone for working when they shouldn't be, arrest me. And, like, then he posted, remember the fake picture that he posted? He posted a fake picture of, like, an ice cream sundae to make it look like he was, like, defying the rules and going out to eat at a restaurant, which, first of all, like, it's the restaurants that follow those rules, not the customers. But anyway, someone outed him because it was a photo from the Buca di Beppo website.
I don't remember this because I don't fuck with Elon like that.
It was so funny.
Yeah.
It was so good. Anyway, yeah, then yes, he just now he's all like, fuck you, California, I'm moving to Texas. A lot of people think there's a conspiracy theory afoot right now that he's actually turned into a giant like right-wing asshole this year in a bid to win over Republicans to electric cars, which is the most generous interpretation
That's pretty
of his
generous
behavior.
I also think that Joe Rogan has said, fuck California, I'm moving to Texas.
That's right. Good riddance to both.
I would like for them to move somewhere else, like Oklahoma.
Yeah.
That's like solidly red, whereas Texas is on the verge of going blue.
That is true.
I like Texas too much for them to be like, cool, go to Texas.
That is true.
My aunt lives in
Very
Houston.
true.
Beyonce is from Houston. Come on, show some respect.
That's true. Okay. Perhaps we can start a campaign to get them to Oklahoma. Poor Oklahoma.
Yeah. Oklahoma's fine, girl. The whole state's red. Oklahoma's fine. Yeah, but no, he had one hell of a year. He really did.
Yep.
I didn't know much. And then he went to the moon, didn't he? Or Mars?
Mars, I don't know. He's another one of these. Him and Jeff Bezos have this whole, like, Mars plan. And I think it was it Jeff Bezos? One of them. They always, whenever they're questioned about this whole thing of like, why are you trying to leave Earth? They always are like, no, it has nothing to do with climate, this, that, the other, blah, blah, blah. But it does definitely seem like kind of an extension of the bunker plan.
It totally is. It totally is. Yeah. No. If you want a fuck Mars, fuck Elon Musk T-shirt, go to our shop because we have them.
Oh yes, yes we do. Yes.
So
this, speaking of population, at the other end of that spectrum, we did have Matt Iglesias going batshit crazy.
Oh my God, I'm so disappointed in him because like I've looked back at some of Matt's articles. Matt is, if you don't know who he is, he's one of the founders of Vox.com. He's been writing there forever. And a lot of his articles from like 2015 or so are talking about climate as this big threat. And I remember listening to him on a podcast in 2020, and he's like, climate change is serious, but it's not that bad. And he wrote a book this year that was advocating for his big policy solution.
1 billion humans.
No, not 1 billion humans, 1 billion Americans. Like, that's his big policy proposal. It was like, well, China's got 1 billion people. India's got 1 billion people. Why can't the United States have 1 billion people? Why do you have a book deal and I don't? Is the better fucking question. I could write a better book hopped up on melatonin.
Oh, God. I know. It's just... Yeah. He basically, I think, has followed the Michael Schellenberger trajectory, basically, where you're like, really smart guy.
Yep.
Like, Michael Schellenberger was like a pretty hardcore environmentalist for a long time, too. That whole, I used to be an environmentalist thing is no joke.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he really was.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what it is with these guys. I have a feeling that part of it is it's like too scary, maybe, or they can't deal with the fact that there might not be a solution in their lifetime, or that
they can't believe that people don't give a fuck about their lives. That's what I think it is. It's
correct. Correct.
If you are a white guy in climate, and if you know a white guy in climate and he's going just a little too far left, keep an eye on that motherfucker. Okay?
That's
it might
right.
fuck around and turn out to be an Elon.
He might just go full circle on you.
You can go so far to the left that you turn right back around on the right because, it's the earth is round. It's not flat. Just one real quick thing. I put in Chevron in the search button in Twitter, and the first thing that came up was Chevron OnlyFans.
Really?
It doesn't appear to be going to anything that makes any sort of sense, but
is there oil porn now?
I don't know. Probably. I dare you to Google oil porn. Dare you. I double fucking dog dare you. I want to talk about ending on a high note, because one thing that dramatically changed about the climate discourse this year is that I think we have really let go of the individual action part of this. And one of the ways I see that manifesting is a little thing that we've come to call green trolling, which is where you basically cyberbully fossil fuel companies online, on Twitter, on Instagram, or whatever.
That's right.
It's something that we've had a big hand in here at Hot Take. Encouraging.
Quite proud of ourselves on that front.
Pretty fucking proud of this. That folks are showing up in the mentions and the comment sections for BP and Shell and Exxon and Chevron and telling them to, in no uncertain terms, go fuck themselves. And
that's right.
I think this is
right.
actually, if you're not a social media person, this might sound frivolous to you. But I would challenge you that social media, especially in the climate times, has become the major form of media. And what happens there is not frivolous at all. It actually becomes the bigger piece of our discourse as a nation. And I will say to you, like, as somebody who is on social media and on Twitter, things that people are catching up to 3 years later, I'm like 3 years ahead of you. So take that for whatever it's worth. And I think that once upon a time, not too long ago, it was all about fighting with climate deniers online, or climate people were fighting with other climate people who weren't, woke enough or left enough. And now we're taking that anger and that rage and taking it out on the actual fossil fuel companies who propagate the misinformation, who try to make themselves seem like fucking climate organizations half the damn time, and redirecting it where it's deserved. And it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. That's right. Yeah. Well, and the people have to realize that the thing that is the most important to fossil fuel companies is what they call the social license to operate.
Exactly.
They're really worried about it. They're really worried that people are going to catch on. It's kind of just that, the public sort of looks the other way about some of their shortcomings, because overall, they're seen as like a good actor, or like an industry that provides enough benefits to society that like the downside is okay, And yes, there are political, policies involved in that and all of that kind of stuff. But the public's perception of them is something that these companies care quite a bit about.
Yeah.
So, and you know what? They don't have like some schlumpy intern running their social media.
No, they do not.
I can guarantee you. They care a lot about it. I have seen internal marketing reports from oil companies. They track the shit out of this stuff, and they come up with all kinds of ways to seem authentic on social media. So constantly punking them when they do that is like,
it's
A,
important.
it's really fun. And B, it actually does do something to erode that social license.
It is actually important. So 2020 is not the first year of green trolling. I remember at the end of 2019, the climate community trolled the living shit out of Exxon Australia because they wished everybody a happy new year while the whole continent was on fire. And we trolled the shit out of BP when they asked people about their carbon footprints in 2019. So it's not the first time that we've done this, but 2020 has been like toward the end of this year has been the year that it really took off. And I'm excited to see people take it more on this year, like creating more memes and like trolling their subsidiary accounts. Like, I strongly encourage this to happen, because this seems to be the first year that it stuck to them, and it's also the first year that a fossil fuel company has become Twitter's main character. Shell decided to post some dumb shit the day before the U.S. election, which didn't work out for them, and Exxon has come very close to following into their footsteps. So let's keep it going. I want every single major oil company to become a main character on Twitter before the end of 2021.
That's right.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Yeah. So speaking of that, we should probably talk about what else we want to see more in 2021.
Yeah. So, I mean, we mentioned ecofascism before. I think we definitely need to see just more and better coverage of that particular threat, and really tracking how it's rising and what's happening.
Yes.
Yeah.
I want to see more of white nationalism colliding with climate coverage, because we can't look away. I also want to see the media actually honor its commitment to covering the climate crisis and making their coverage accessible on their homepages. Accessible and findable, because often you got to dig.
Yes. That's right. It's true. I mean, that's a big part of why we started the whole Hot Take Digest, was that we realized that, like, we knew where to look and it was still hard to find all the stories.
Exactly.
So, yeah. That's right. We do want to see climate bleed out of the science section and really start to get infused into a lot of other types of stories.
Exactly.
So I think we're starting to see that in 2020, but like, let's see more of it in 2021.
A lot more of it. We want to see the fossil fuel industry lose its social license to operate.
That's right.
I want to see them every single time they show up on Twitter or anywhere else. I want to see them immediately hit with an egg.
Yes, exactly. Like if like the head of ExxonMobil was like out and about in New York all the time, for example, I feel like he would probably get heckled fairly regularly. And the same thing should happen on Twitter.
Yeah, he should.
Yeah. Yeah, like, okay, they might be able to operate for a while, but that doesn't mean that like we have to applaud them for it or be nice about it.
No.
Yeah, we want to hear more voices from the Global South. A lot more.
A lot more.
Like, a lot more.
Yeah, so...
Not just, like, writing the stories, but also being quoted and sourced for stories, too. I just really think we need to see more expertise from that part of the world.
I would love a good newsletter from the Global South. I would sign up to that shit so fast. And that's why newsletters are actually really important outlets, because you don't have to pass by all these gatekeepers, and you can monetize it. So, hey.
That's right.
We want to see the lens of climate accountability widen to include the industry's many enablers. And sometimes that includes the media industry.
Mm-hmm. That is very, very right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that, oil companies make a fun and easy target, but let's not forget all the people that continue to prop them up, and do continue
tech companies
to enable false narratives about this stuff. Tech companies, absolutely. Media companies, PR and advertising companies.
Yep.
There's a lot of folks there. Yes, I'd love to see climate policy coverage get past the sort of political horse racing approach. And actually look at, like, what will this policy do?
Right.
Who will it affect?
Right.
Yeah.
And get past like this narrative of loss and start talking about like actually the Green New Deal wants to give people shit. Like, let's talk about that.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
I want to see the media learn how to tell fracking stories that aren't parroting the industry's talking points. Like, they really
that would be nice. Yes. I swear. It's really interesting. I heard some like behind the scenes media gossip lately that apparently FTI Consulting, which is like the main kind of PR consulting firm that a lot of the gas companies in particular use, is sort of a gatekeeper to pipelines. So like if you're a reporter and you're doing a story on a pipeline and you need to go out and like physically see the infrastructure, like you have to go through them. And I really feel like that fact has influenced a lot of fracking stories.
Yeah, and people don't know that.
People don't know that. And like that firm in particular is batshit crazy. Like they're really, they really do like a full court press on reporters, and they are totally the guys that will like call your editor and complain that you're biased if you criticize the industry at all.
Yeah.
So like, I think that has had a big role in shaping how the media talks about fracking and why like every single fracking story is like, but what about jobs?
Yeah.
But what about this? And kind of like doesn't interrogate that stuff, because actually like that industry claims a lot more jobs than they actually give to people.
Yeah. They do.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and then we want to see climate make its way on the TV and film in a real way. Like, there were two ways we saw this in the past year that we talked about on this show. There was the Netflix show The Politician and the HBO show I May Destroy You that had really fantastic climate narratives. But I want to see more of that in 2021.
Yeah. Yeah. What I loved about both of those was that climate was like part of an existing show. It was like a storyline in an existing show. So it wasn't like a climate show. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was just like, oh yeah, of course. Like people who are living in today's world would grapple with this subject in their lives. If for like series and films and stuff that are set today, if people are not interacting with climate change in some way, it seems like bullshit.
Exactly. And I think that they both kind of raised the bar and set an example in a way that I hope can't be undone.
I agree. They were so smart.
They were.
Like, just smart and nuanced and like...
Yeah.
They were good. Yeah.
So that's our wish list for 2021. If we will be looking at this and seeing if folks live up to our goals that we set for you on this podcast and in our newsletter, which you subscribe to.
That's right. We'll have a link in the show notes, and we'll also include links to lots and lots of stories that we referenced in this episode. And we'll be back with more guests in the next few weeks.
Yeah. In the meantime, you should follow us on Twitter. We're at Real Hot Take. I am at Mary Hegler. And Amy, where are you again?
At Amy Westervelt.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
A
That's
very, very creative Twitter handle.
Both of us have very creative Twitter handles. So if you like the show, leave us a rating or review. If you do not like the show, email Brian Kahn at earther.com.
That's right.
That's Brian, BRIAN .KAHN at earther.com. He'll be glad to hear from you.
Yeah, he will.
Yeah.
And we'll see you next time.
We'll see you next time.